Welcome to my next guest as I continue this 20,000 second live stream for 20,000 subscribers on my channel.
Oh.
We're now 3.5 hours in, and I still have a voice, so that's good news. But I have to thank all my guests for talking and keeping the conversation going. So Joe, Pastor Joe, how are you doing?
Hello, hello, Tim. Hello, Nick.
Hey, brother.
Nicholas. I've always wanted to meet you in person and live, and I know we've met over Instagram. And
We
dude,
have,
I
yeah.
love your channel.
Thank you, brother. Same.
Yeah.
That's
Oh.
great.
I'm excited now. You see, I'll stay on for a few minutes and then I'll jump off, and I'm excited to see you two chat. So,
Well, you guys have been talking about so many deep things. I feel like I'm going to shoot the intelligence level, sink it down.
not at all, brother.
You guys have
You are very
good.
intelligent, Joe. But to be honest with you, we could use maybe an hour of a little more lighthearted topics.
Yes.
We'll put it that way.
I got you covered on that. I got you covered.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating about you, Joe, is where you live. At least I find it fascinating because it's just a totally different part of the country from where I live. And what's cool is we've got a Nicholas here with us who's in Northern Ireland. So, Nicholas, you're 5 hours ahead of me.
Yep.
Wow.
Pastor Joe here is 3 hours, I think, behind me.
That's
Right.
Mhm.
So, and actually, while all three of us are on, Joe, I think if you move a little to your left, just a little, no, other way. Sorry.
The other left.
That's it.
Which wasn't very
That's
smart.
that's pretty good.
Is that good?
Yeah, a little back the other way, just to
Okay.
back the other way. Perfect.
All
It's
right.
because the camera angle's thinner with all three of us, so I had
Yeah.
to get you
Well,
realigned there.
I'll be jumping out now anyway, Tim. Just you give me the word and you two can chat away.
Yeah, I'll let you go in a little bit, but I haven't
Yep.
officially said goodbye to you. Yeah, I'm just kind of commenting here though on a divergence of time zones that we're
Yeah.
covering here, right?
Mhm.
That's like a good part of the way around the world between both of you, and I'm in the middle. So
Yeah.
Hey, before you jump off, because I was really enjoying the conversations that you guys were having, particularly in the end there. I do think that we have lost I think we have lost civility when it comes to talking about harder things. And we have become so polarized here at least in the US. I don't know how it is over there with you guys. It's sort of like you take an extreme or you take a position and everybody just goes to the extreme. And then
Mhm.
what you do is you erase the truth
Yep.
of really the truth and the authority of the scriptures, right? And
Mhm.
so pretty much you go to the extreme of things. But it's sort of like if you understand how to have a more civil discussion, I think you're able to straddle the truth a lot better.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I think when you sit down with someone and you talk online, it seems like you're this far apart.
Right.
But whenever you actually sit down and talk together, you realize maybe you're actually this far apart. And I think what often happens, and I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but it's something that I personally try to do, is I remember that when I talk to people that I disagree with, that they are a brother in the Lord. And how can I then treat them with disrespect? I can't. And I think what happens with social media is it sets up an invisible barrier perhaps in our mind where it's like, you believe this, you're not really, and it just becomes very, I don't know, just very rude and very disrespectful. But
Yeah.
I like the point you're making though, Joe. I do think truth is a lot of times more difficult to get at than we admit that it is or that we want it to be. And sometimes, and that's why I mentioned earlier, I used to have like really kind of debate conversations with my brothers, but they were helpful because it forced us to really think through. Because as humans, we just like whatever our opinion is right off the bat, we kind of just assume we're right.
Well, yeah. And I think that closes us off, right, to what the other
Yeah.
person might be saying. And it also has, the way that you argue, the way that you talk to somebody does have a lot to do with upbringing. Like, for instance,
Yeah.
I was kind of joking on the chat that I'm Irish by way of the Philippines. I'm nowhere near that. but if you ever sit down with or go to a Filipino home, like we argue a lot. Like we sit down. Like I remember growing up, my brother and my sister and I, we would just be yelling at each other. And if a stranger walked into our home, you would swear that we were like going to kill each other. But
Mhm,
it's really we were just expressing what we feel about a certain opinion, like
mhm,
TV shows or music or whatever. But if somebody dropped in on the conversation, you'd go, "Man, your children are terrible." Like they would tell my parents, like, "Your children are terrible. They're just yelling at each other." But what it is, it's a private discussion, right? This is
mhm.
a discussion we're having at home, and I think
Mm.
that affects the way that we talk to people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's true.
Especially to
That's
strangers, right? Like we may have a shared understanding that I love the brother that's sitting across from me, and I don't agree with him, and I could get very passionate about it,
Mhm,
but I don't dislike you. It's just I'm very passionate about a subject.
mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And at our best, I think that that's how we ought to be and we can be even as Americans because we do have very big issues we're
Yeah.
dealing with and they're worth arguing about on some level, but we have to be careful because it can veer into bitterness and hatred. And there's plenty of people, not only who are fostering it in America, but who are making money off of fostering
Oh,
hatred, right?
that's
And
right.
that's not good.
Yeah.
But in Ireland, you don't have these problems, I'm sure.
No, we have our own fair share of problems, and one of the things I was laughing about, Joe, is the Irish would actually be very similar. Behind closed doors, families can sound like they're taking each other's heads off.
That's right.
But anyone outside the family say anything about someone inside the family, it's a
Yeah,
different kettle of fish. But yeah, I think just when it comes to our online interactions, because more and more ministries are going online, people are online sharing with each other. We need to realize, like Red in the comments said it here, we do need to realize the people we are interacting with online are actual people.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be a launch into I think a good discussion we can start off with here in the
Hmm.
next segment,
Mhm.
which is dealing with the online feedback that we get when we have an online presence. And I know Joe here has a channel, Joe's Bibles, so we'll talk about that. But I want to
Hmm.
say goodbye to Nicholas and thank him so much for spending over an hour with me
My
to get
pleasure.
me through this leg of the live stream. So thank you, Nicholas, so much for your perseverance.
My pleasure, brother. Congrats again on the 20K. And gents, I look forward to hearing the conversation between you. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. God
See you,
bless you,
Nicholas.
Nicholas. All right. So now I got you by yourself.
Oh my goodness.
And we can pick each other's brains here for the next hour or so. And Jason Whitaker is going to be my last hour to
Oh
take me to the final home stretch to achieve 20,000 seconds on
oh
this
my
live
goodness.
stream. It's pretty good. And amazingly, I'm seeing some of the same people in the comments that I saw toward the beginning. So there are
There's
actually
there's
people watching
Dwayne.
for hours.
I
Yeah.
I missed your conversation with Dwayne, man. I had him on my channel. I love that dude.
Yeah, he's so kind and gracious and thoughtful, and really digs into issues deeply. So it was fun to talk to him. So in the meantime, while you're getting that set up, I've said this segment's going to be sponsored by Starbucks. I mean, you're in the Seattle area, aren't you?
I am in the Seattle area. I'm east of Seattle. I'm trying to fiddle with this while trying to talk to
Yeah, you
you.
can.
Yeah,
You
I'm on
don't.
the east side of Seattle, but it is in the Seattle area. That's
Okay,
where we're at.
and so you're not like really in the thick of the city. This.
No, absolutely not. I'm wearing my Seattle gear today, but uh, I'm a Dodger fan.
That's
But
right.
tonight, our church youth group. My kids are in the youth group now. They are going to go see a Mariners game, and so I'm going to go with them to be one of the
Hmm.
adults that goes with them to the
Hmm.
game. So I've got my Seattle gear on.
Oh, cool. Well, by the way, people are saying the levels are good,
Oh,
so you
okay,
don't need
cool.
to fiddle too much with that. Um, I think I think we're in good shape. So you said you're going to a game tonight? Did I
I
hear that right?
am. We are going to a game tonight.
Which game is it?
I don't even know who the Mariners are playing. But
Well, good for you, because I took my son down to college just a couple days ago. We went down to the Philly area, and he's going to Cairn University, not far from Philadelphia. And when we got down there, my brother said, "Hey, you guys want to go down for a Phillies game?" So we did not drag our feet. We were we were totally happy to go to a game, and so I got to catch a Phillies game. So now you're gonna go
nice.
watch the Mariners.
I
That's
am.
great. And hope they're not playing the Dodgers. You would know that.
No, the Dodgers are coming in September, and that's what I've got tickets for.
All right. That's great. Well,
So
it's nice to talk to another baseball fan.
yeah.
I was trying to get Nicholas interested that Phillies and the Mets are playing in London for a couple
Oh,
games next year. So I'm kind of plotting that maybe I could get over to London during that time and drag Nicholas to a baseball game.
that would be awesome. Would you get him some baseball gear?
Oh yeah, I would love to. Anything I could do to he called me the like a Philadelphia Phillies evangelist. He
Okay.
said something like
The Phillies evangelist. Nice.
yeah,
Very
yeah, I
nice.
guess I am. I've tried to convert all my children, and I've done pretty well. I have a pretty good success rate. I'm
Nice.
competing with the Red Sox here,
Oh
who have had
man.
some good years since we've lived here. But so I'd like to hear a little bit for the audience sake and for my sake about kind of what you're doing out there. I mean, people may
Mm,
have seen your channel. You have a great YouTube channel where you talk about Bibles, Joe's Bibles. But you're a pastor.
I am.
That's your full time position, and you're at it's Lighthouse Christian Church. Is that the
Yeah,
correct name?
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and
And
I'm in my office today. This is my
oh,
lunch break, and I've got a
perfect.
big sign, "Don't disturb," right now. No, I am a pastor at in the Bellevue area, and it's one of the hardest places to minister to. I
Hmm.
think but it's good. I mean, I love our church. I think we're the best that we can here to minister
Yeah.
and to share God's word. But it's not easy here in the Seattle area. It's just rough out here.
You're saying that people aren't just like clapping and cheering for you all the time when they hear you're a pastor?
Yeah, the conversation will shut down, and it's you get different looks from people, you know. But it's like,
Uh-huh.
this is what I do. This is God's calling for me, right? So I'm not gonna be ashamed of that. It's like,
And you weren't from that area originally, right?
no, I was letting you. Yeah, I was born in the Philippines and then bounced around a lot. I was born in the Philippines, moved to the U.S. We lived in Chicago for a year. My dad is a huge Cubs fan, and then we moved to L.A. for a number of years, and that's where I became a Dodger fan. Then we moved back to Chicago. But
Oh,
basically, I'm Midwest guy. Chicago, and then to Iowa was my first job out of college, and then moved out here
okay.
in 2000.
So when you say you're Midwest guy, is that kind of
Yeah.
what you feel is the culture that most shaped you?
I believe so. There's something really cool about Midwest culture, and I'm going to say specifically. So I love Chicago and spent formidable years there. But when I say Midwest, I spent formidable years, more formidable ones, spiritually, in Iowa. So I lived in Des
Hmm.
Moines for 3 years, and I was part of a Calvary Chapel back there. I think we were talking about Calvary Chapel um, a while back, but yeah, as part of Calvary Chapel, they used the New King James, which was totally different for me. I had, became a follower of Jesus using the NIV, and so in the New King James, I was like, "What is happening in this text?"
Wow.
Some of these things are just really different. But I would
Hmm.
say I love the Midwest, and I'd probably associate more with the Midwest than well, I don't know. I'd hate to say more than Seattle, but I do love the city. I do love this area, but I would say what really has shaped me is the Midwest. I mean, God working through that.
So in you said Iowa?
Yeah, Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay, I get confused because in our brains when we don't live in that area, just it's Idaho and Iowa
Yeah, yeah,
meld
yeah, yeah.
together. So Iowa is more rural setting. Is that what you're saying for you?
It's a lot of rule, but I spent time 3 years in the city, so I was in Des Moines, and that's what you would call
Right.
the big city in Iowa, and I
Okay, but you
love
kind
that
of
area.
described it as the way you just said it. At least it sounds like Seattle is much more urban.
It
Am I
is.
hearing that right? Yeah,
It's very urban.
yeah.
Um, but like the Midwest, like in Des Moines, coming from Chicago, which is also really urban. My first year there, I would go to the grocery store, and it would freak me out. People would start talking to me in the grocery store, and I was like, "Why are you talking to me right now, man?" It's like, and then people would leave their doors unlocked, like their houses and their apartments, and people would just walk into our place, like, "Why aren't you locking your door, man?"
Yes, exactly.
But there's a real warmth in the Midwest
Yeah.
that I love. I feel like there's a I don't know, more sense of greater sense of family than I do that I've sensed here in the Pacific Northwest. I think it's a
Yeah.
different kind of family here.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I mean, city versus rural or urban versus rural really describes a lot of just the perspective differences that you see in America and in many other places too, I'm sure, throughout the world, because there's a different way of operating when you live. And I'll give you one example is driving. If you drive in a city, now I know not all cities are the same, but typically you do have to be more aggressive. You have to accommodate for the fact there's a lot more traffic. So the style of driving in the city is different than when like where I live now. You have so many roads where it's just long roads with the most dangerous thing is hitting a deer probably or a moose or something.
Mm,
But even in the towns, there's not a lot of traffic. And so when people get to a crosswalk, it's pretty much expected that you're going to stop for them. I mean, it is
right.
technically the law too here, but still, it's really just etiquette to stop for the person in the crosswalk. But if you stop for everybody in a crosswalk in the city, you'd be causing major traffic problems. So, you know, and so we look at each other sometimes through those lenses of like, oh, your value system is flawed
Mhm.
because, you're focusing on such and such a thing. Yeah, but if you live in the country, that makes sense to have those ways of doing things. And I
Right.
think being very personal with people
Hmm.
works when you're in a smaller environment because how are you going to thrive as a community? You got to work together. If you're not a big community, you need each other.
Right.
And you need to stick together and be able to contribute. But if you're in a city, it's actually a problem if you try to connect with too many people or to you in some ways it's more safe if you can find that smaller group and kind of keep everybody else out when you're in the city. And I don't mean that in some sort of a mean way, but like I mean just in terms of like how are you going to even survive day to day
Mm.
and thrive when there's just millions of people around you. You can't
Yeah.
stop and talk to everybody for an hour.
Well, yeah, and I just think the culture living in Iowa, it was such an eye-opening culture because you do get both of those sort of value systems. So Des
Mm,
Moines was more of an urban place, even though it wasn't very large.
mm,
It did have the urban feel. But then you just go outside for about 20 miles or
mm,
10 miles and you're in the country. And that served me well. I don't want to
yeah,
get political, but one of the areas for me
yeah.
that was eye-opening, having come from Chicago and Los Angeles, was um, I had buddies in on their farms in Iowa, and
Mm,
shooting guns was like it was just a way of life. And coming from more urban areas,
mm,
we saw guns as that's really dangerous. You don't want to walk around that. Well, you
Mm,
go out into the farm country and it's a necessity. And so
exactly.
I remember thinking like, oh my god, when I was holding somebody's shotgun and somebody handed it to me, I'm like, should I have a license for this?
Mm,
Um, but I never understood that, or never understood that kind of culture until I moved to Iowa and got to see
mhm.
like this really different cultures
Yeah.
that we have that's like next to each other, the urban and then the rural. But
Yeah, that's really interesting point you're making. Honestly, I can't help but to think of the political, not just the guns, but I'm actually thinking about how guns represent something to Middle America
right,
that is very, I think, tied into their survival, at least on some level. That the cities have so many people. They're such a, and especially nowadays, because
mm,
so much of the population has moved to the cities, they really are dominating the politics in many ways.
correct,
And the problem that you have in a country is we're a big country, we're very diverse. So
right,
if the politics of the urban areas are completely dominating the way we think about issues in places like the middle of nowhere, in the middle of America, they can feel very threatened by that because it's like, hey, you're kind of hampering on our way of life.
right. And there's a small mindedness that comes from even living in the urban areas, and where we think, well, you come from the city, so you must have a wide understanding. Like the common thing is,
Mm.
well, you're less ignorant because you come from the city. But having lived in both places, you will begin to see that even people who come from a big
Yeah.
city have a narrow mindedness. They have a closed mindedness because let's go back to the guns issue, right? Here in the city or in the cities, we think, well, let's get rid of all of them. Let's get rid of all the guns, without really understanding that if you go into a more rural area like farm country,
Mm.
you need one. Like my
Yeah.
buddies when I
Yeah.
was living there, the nearest place, the nearest populated area was like 15, 20 miles. Well, you can't, if something ever happened on your farm or even on your property, it's going to take a while for somebody to come and, like the police, to come and help you out. You have to protect yourself, right? And so I
That's right.
think that's what's missing from a lot of the discussion
Hmm.
that we have about some of these topics is
Hmm.
you are educated a certain way if you come from the big city, but your focus and the width of your understanding is limited, and you have to understand that.
Hmm.
And I don't want to say this very arrogantly, because I came from Chicago, I came from LA, and I understood, like, yeah, there's a certain way of thinking about certain issues, but it was eye opening for me to go to a place where it was
Mm.
very different from an urban setting. It really was eye opening. Like, oh, I didn't understand that about this issue, you
Yeah.
know. And we're
Yeah.
just talking about guns here, but I mean, it spills into all sorts of other
It
issues as
does.
well.
It totally does, and that's exactly what I was driving at is your way of thriving in
Hmm.
different environments is going to be dependent on how you engage those specific set of circumstances
Right.
and the set of circumstances that you face when you're in a very rural remote area. It's a very different set of circumstances, and beyond that, I mean, New England, I'm in a rural area. By and large, it's quite rural up here, and it's cold. Uh, so that is also a factor in how people have, for generations here, had to
Right.
survive, where
Right.
they had to cut their own wood to make it through the winter, and they had to make do with as a lot of limited resources and really make sure that they could go far with those resources. So to this day, New Englanders, uh, many of them are very frugal people,
Ah,
and very good with, saving their money, saving their necessities,
that's
but it's how
hilarious.
they survived here.
Yeah. But you're talking about weather and how it's different from different cultures, right? So here, being a pastor at our church, we have a policy for worship, for people leading worship. Don't wear like shorts on stage, and don't wear, midriffs. Don't wear what do you call it, like tank tops. Well, we have people from our church, because it's a predominantly Asian American church. We have people from our church who come from Hawaii, and their style of dress is totally different from
Hmm.
here. Even
Hmm.
in the Pacific
Hmm.
Northwest, people are wearing short shorts, and and so they just bring those cultures into my church or into our church, and then we look at it and go, "Oh, you shouldn't be wearing that," which I could totally understand. But for them, it's just this is how we were brought up. This is what
Yeah.
casual looks like. But there is a
Really
huge
good point.
difference, even in regions, right? Now,
Yes.
yeah. So that's
That's so true. And I grew up in New York, in New Jersey, was where I grew up. I was 40 minutes north of Philadelphia and about an hour south of New York City, and and then I was really in the Trenton area, Trenton, New Jersey.
mm,
And for my younger years, I actually lived downtown in Trenton, in the inner city area for some years, and then we lived in a suburb. All that to say, having lived there, went to school in Boston, and actually lived for 4 years in the Boston area, and now up in Upper New England, rural area, I've been able to experience that variety of settings and really understand why people look at things the way they do
yeah.
because I've been in those different environments.
Right, right. But see, that's you're talking about having an experience of where to live and kind of a wide breadth of understanding of where you live and the cultures that you're
Hmm.
experiencing. Um, I didn't show this in the video that the interview that I did with you, but I do want to say thank you again. When we went into 2020, you had all of these awesome discussions with people who were different from you. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that was really important because I think you had an African American dude on there, and I enjoyed that conversation because in the midst
Hmm.
of our polarization as a country, we have to remember, wait a minute, I have friends from different cultures. I have a different experience. And we can't just talk about issues as if they were sound bites from a news network.
Hmm.
Like these are real people that we deal with. And so these are not just issues that people are doing. We live with people who are experiencing things differently from us.
Amen. And when you come to understand how people think and appreciate it, you realize people are so much the same deep
Hmm.
down. That's what amazes me, and I think that's what Jesus was teaching us. Not that we shouldn't draw moral lines, because I do think Jesus drew lines and made clear what is
Right.
right and wrong. But when it came to how we treat people, there were so many people in his culture that didn't even want to associate, didn't even want to get close to certain people,
Right.
and they stopped looking at them as people. They stopped looking at them as, in many ways, sharing the same humanity that everybody has. And that's where the parable of the Good Samaritan is so powerful, right? Because it's the Samaritan who actually
Right.
treats this other Jew with humanity,
Right.
and realizes, if I was in his place, I sure would want someone to stop and bandage up my wounds and make sure I'm safe. So when I talk to people all over, I'm just amazed how alike we are.
Hmm.
Even if you are in a rural area, you're trying to survive. You're trying
Hmm.
to do what's best for as best you know how, right? So back to our kind of our initial conversation, though. You're in Seattle,
Yeah.
that area, and it's not easy, you say. So what are the dynamics and challenges that you're facing, and how are you seeking to do ministry in your setting?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot there. I would
Well, you can
say,
say whatever you want.
I think the challenges that we're facing now is I'm amazed at how people don't want to talk about even the word sin. And this may be very churchy, this part of this conversation, but um, there is a whole kind of church culture that we're seeing here in the Pacific Northwest where we're sort of sin averse, meaning we understand that these are the things that are not aligned. Sin is not aligned with who God is and his character. But even to mention that tiny 3-letter word in a worship service, it's sort of like, why are we skirting around that? And so, and I get it, right? I think when people hear the word sin, people want to rephrase it in a way that people might understand. I get that. But if we preach the scriptures, and even Jesus himself says, go and sin no more, well, we have to have some understanding of what that is. And so we can't get to that place unless we define it, unless we talk about it, unless it's brought up in a sermon. And so
Mm.
I guess what I'm saying is there's such an overly sensitive way of talking about religious things here in the Pacific Northwest that we never get to really the heart of the gospel. Well, Jesus is the heart of the gospel, but what he came to do. And to even say, like, Jesus even said, go and sin no more. Like, there's a reason why he said that, you know?
That's right.
But those are
That's
some
right.
of the things that we're dealing with, I think, here in the Pacific Northwest, at least with some areas of our church and in our area, is there's such a sensitivity to what you can and cannot say.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and then
Mm.
it hampers you, right? It puts this really bad boundary on what you can and can't say at church. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm having to fight with now is if it says sin in the scriptures, let's call it sin. If
Yeah.
this isn't in there, well, don't bring it up. It's merely your opinion.
Yeah.
But let's stay with the truth.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say that's a really difficult thing. Some of the things that we're fighting with here, and cancel culture is crazy. And I don't know how you're feeling about it, but hopefully we're starting to come down and starting to realize cancel culture really does suck, and it sucks for a
Mm.
whole lot of people inside and outside the church. Hopefully we're getting to
Mm.
that place. But the sensitivity to words and what we use and what we can't use, it's now that's gone to an extreme, and hopefully we can get back to, well, what does the scripture actually say about this thing? And I get it,
Mm.
like people
Mm.
don't want to say sin, and they want to say, well, what is it? It escapes my mind now, like a failure or darkness or whatever. But let's just call it what it is. It's it's the thing that God does not want for his people,
Yeah.
you know.
I think what you're saying is really good, like really helpful, and in a sentiment a lot of us feel, and we're kind of coming to grips with it.
Yeah.
I think maybe what it is in our lifetimes. There's always shifts taking place. The world
Mm.
is always changing. You can see as you look back, but when you're in it, it's so slow and so subtle.
Right.
Occasionally there are bellwether situations that really clue you in as to. I remember when gay marriage,
Hmm.
Obama, I always
Yeah.
tell young people this. In 2008, he was the one who said marriage is between a
Right.
man and a woman.
Oh, I
That's
didn't know
what it
that.
is.
I just remember
Yeah.
2013 when the bill passed.
So in 2012, probably around that time when he was reelected, he said his views were evolving. So
Oh.
the truth is, he changed, and then by 2015, the Supreme Court
Yeah.
made their decision, and that was a bellwether. That was like,
Yeah.
wow. But I've seen that when I was little, that issue was looked at so differently, even by the
Oh, yeah.
culture, right? So what we have to face is that as Christians, our value system and our worldview has become the minority
Right.
position, even
Right.
if people don't say it, because there's
Right.
still a lot of people saying they believe in God, but in practice, that's not how they're living.
Right.
And because we're the minority position, we have to learn a new way to be at peace with, not it's not going to be peaceful. Actually, we have to be at peace with the fact that we're not going to be accepted the way we used to be,
Right. And the truth is, we are living in a post-Christendom world, at least here in the U.S. That's the reality of things. And I get it when people tell
especially
me,
in the coast regions,
especially in
right?
the coast, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's still fairly safe in the middle,
Yeah.
some parts. But on the coast, it really does show we are in post-Christendom society here in the United States. And I get it that people want me to be more sensitive with my words, or they want me to be able to say, let's not call it this, for understanding's sake. And I get it. But that's why the preacher is there, right? To be able to unpack what the scriptures say. And because the scriptures will address humanity and humanity at its worst. But in order to really understand the gospel and the goodness of it, we have to go there. We have to go into how dark things are. But I understand there's cultural sensitivities. I do, again, just say that we are
Mm,
in post Christendom, and who we
yeah.
are as believers now on the coast, it's not what it was 20 years ago. And I was just talking to a pastor yesterday, and I was telling him, like, it's such a weird world that we're living in, where where people are saying you've got to write a position paper on gay marriage or
Mm,
whatever the topic issue is. Whereas 20 years ago, we just understood this is what marriage is supposed to be between a man and a
yeah.
woman. But it's the culture that we're living in now. And it's sort
Yeah.
of like, how do we deal with this? And I think that's what we're dealing with a lot of the different churches here. A lot of the conservative churches that I see eye to eye with here on the West Coast, where we are shocked a little bit. We're not super surprised that we're living in post Christianity, but we are a little bit astounded. Like, we have to write a paper so that people can know our position or where we stand on marriage. Like, that's so weird, you know? But that's the reality of it, right? It's the reality of where we
Yeah.
live.
Now, when you say you have to write a position, are you saying as a church leadership for almost legal reasons, that sort of thing?
Well, no, hopefully not for legal reasons, but one of the amazing things that we have here in our church is we have a lot of young people that are looking to know where we stand as a church with these issues, not because they want to contradict us, but because they're
Mm,
looking for support. Like, the young people in the Christians in our church, they enter into the workforce and the people that they're in, and they have different values from what we see in the
yeah.
scriptures. And so they want to know from me, and they want to know from the church, do you support us? And I have to have
Hmm.
these private conversations with them, or one-on-one conversations, and it's becoming more and more where it's like, well, maybe we should just put it on our website, or just
Hmm.
talk to our young people like this is what the
Yeah.
scriptures say, you know
Yeah.
um, or even about life, right? I think people, not to go into abortion, but I'm
Hmm.
amazed that
I
we're
already
even.
did earlier, so.
Oh yeah. But I mean, to talk about life and the value of it,
Hmm.
it's so bizarre living in
Hmm.
this world. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, not for legal reasons. It's
Okay.
more to give an understanding and help people be supported navigating through a post-Christian world.
Yeah. Well, while we're on this topic, I was planning to mention that we had a great conversation on your channel, and it was
Mm.
about the Christian Standard Bible.
Oh yeah.
And believe it or not, Bible translations are very much reflective. And I know you know this, Joe, but just speaking to the audience and people who might be listening, a lot of people think translations are it's just like this academic thing. Like, how do you translate it? Do you want to do it this way? Do you want to do that? It's actually very much wrapped up, though, it's not done in a vacuum, is the way
Right.
I would put it, right? Translation is shaped by culture. So actually, the King James Version is a really good example of it is a product of a certain time. And I think it's one of the reasons it stood the test of time is because it came right at the time when I think England set a course
Hmm.
that was very powerful and a position of great influence in the world for hundreds of years. And their spirituality had really come into its own, how
Hmm.
they expressed their Christianity. And the King James Version is really much the epitome of that, and of a certain
Hmm.
uh, reflection of English culture that had wide influence in the world. But the English Empire, the British Empire, didn't stay strong forever, and
Hmm.
American culture has now become incredibly pervasive throughout the world. But the reality is the culture we live in today is very different than the culture of the King James world.
Right.
And so the way you do translation back then is going to look different than the way you're going to do translation now. And it's not just a matter of literal
Hmm.
versus less literal. It's also even the sound of it. There are still many people who love that more formal sound.
Yeah.
But when we talk about translation, one of the things that we're dealing with in our culture is what is the place of formality
Hmm.
in when it comes to the Bible and our translations, and when it comes to how we express ourselves in a church setting. And I find myself, because of the background that I have, I'm like right on the fence. I appreciate formality and I love the King James because I grew up with it. But on the other hand, not only has our culture shifted, but I have to also look at what was the language of the Bible writers. Was
Right.
it like high and formal,
Right.
or was it more converse? And it probably depends on the author and the situation that they were writing in, and the form of their writing. But I do think that the Christian Standard Bible,
Yeah. Yeah.
our specific translation, it's not as formal sounding as the King James or the New King James or even the English Standard Version. Um, but that's not necessarily bad. I think
No.
that translation nowadays is really at an opportunity to kind of be able to do something that is going to be really helpful. Oh, I hear Jason in the background, by the way. I'm just going to say hi to him,
Oh.
but I'm gonna turn that sound off. Yeah, yeah, you're not added in, Jason. Don't worry. But anyway, I do think there's a real cool opportunity right now taking place
Yeah.
with Bible translations, and it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, because honestly there are too many Bible translations in English right now.
I agree with
To be
you.
honest. Yeah.
There's way too much, but I appreciate it. And I
Yeah.
think so my experience with it is I was really stuck in a rut. I mean, I felt
Yeah.
like this was like I thought the ESV, I love the ESV, and that's forever going to be the one translation that resonated most with me. And I was really stuck, and I thought this is the way it should sound because it's taken some from the King James family, right? That's where it's rooted in. And so you hear a lot of the phrases that you go, "Oh, that's how the Bible should sound." I was really challenged by that with the New Living Translation, with the NIV. Now the NIV is
Mm.
another translation I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
go into. I've kind
Mm-hmm.
of I need some distance from the NIV, um, but I do appreciate the CSB. So I started. I'm supposed to read through it right from September 1st through December 31st. It's my very
Yeah.
first read through. I started getting into it, and I started just to kind of preview what the Bible reading plan looks like. And there's parts that I really, really love, and there's parts that I'm like, I don't know why they translate. Here's one. Here's one. Um, the phrase, and I've talked to people about this before, resident alien. So you get
Mm.
that in Genesis, right? So I started reading maybe about
Mm.
the first 20 chapters of Genesis. And
Mm.
I get it. I understand what they're trying to get at is it's basically you're the sojourner, you're the stranger on earth, right? This is not your
Mm.
home.
Mm.
Having because I was an immigrant and I
Mm.
know what resident alien looks like, and they gave me a resident alien card when I was really little. So every time that comes up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think of immigration and sort of all these different politics when I see it. But I get it, right? Another word that I appreciate. I just read it this morning. I think it was in Exodus. I'm kind of jumping around here before I start reading in September. The
Mm.
word obliterated. I think it was in Exodus, and it was something like was it Pharaoh obliterated or God obliterated Pharaoh, whatever. But I thought, man, I've never seen that word come up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think the ESV's ever used the word obliterated, but I get it. I understand that in the CSB, they are trying to make clear to us in a modern way, for those of us with
Mm.
modern eyes, what this is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so going back to the whole resident alien thing, I
Mm.
get that, right? Because strangers or even aliens, right? Like if you read that in another translation, you go, "Oh, a person that doesn't sound right." Um, but I will say, like in the NASB, I just love the way they rendered it, strangers. And I think is that how sojourners? Is that how the
Mm-hmm.
NKJV translates it?
I
There's a
think that may be.
yeah,
I'm not sure.
there's a real beauty to the
Yeah.
way more formal translations say it.
Mm.
But I
Yeah.
do appreciate, and I think the CSB is
Mm-hmm.
starting to show me that I really appreciate the modernization of different translations or the way that we would speak now.
Well, this is what I was saying about how culture changes very slowly and we don't even notice when we're in it. but you
Yeah.
look back and you kind of see the same with language. Mark Ward just put out a video on what language does and what it doesn't do, I think is the way it's titled. And it's very good video. I recommend it. I think it just came out today. Mark Ward.
Oh, I
And
should see that.
what is really coming out about that is we tend to think of language as very static.
Yeah.
How do you know the definition of a word? It's in the dictionary. And then he points out there is no the dictionary. We have multiple dictionaries, and they have committees that
That's
make
true.
different decisions. So
Right.
even there's flexibility. But actually, he said a word means what it is used as.
Right.
That's actually in real life how words work. You know, they're based on their usage, and we know if you study the history of words, how they actually shift meanings over time.
Right.
And there's a really cool word, I've thought of it too, but he mentioned it on his video. It's the word peruse.
Peruse.
I
That's a
love.
great word.
Well, you know why it's a great word? Because it means two opposite things. It literally can mean that you are reading something very intently,
Oh.
but it can also mean to just glance over something in a more surface way.
Yeah.
And depending on the context, it means one or the other. It's the
Oh, that's
same word.
I'm
Yeah.
so used to the latter definition, peruse, just kind of like glancing, kind of surfacey looking at things. That's how I would take a look at it. I do want to say I'm looking at the chat. There's nothing wrong with the NIV. Totally agree with you. I've just been in it for like 7 years, and I just need a break from it. And I was talking to
Mm.
somebody else about this too yesterday. Like at the heart of when I study, I just love the more formal translations. And I do want to say this. I have
Mm.
a bias towards the formal translations
Mm.
because and this has nothing to do with translate.
Mm.
Maybe it
Mm.
does, but to me it's I was joking with somebody. Formal translations is how I think the Bible should sound. But not that
Yeah.
that's the accurate, just like to me
Yeah.
Psalm 23, it's just
Yeah.
that's how
Yeah.
I'm used to it. You
Yeah.
know, the King James, the New King James, the ESV, that rendering, that's what I'm used to.
I think we have to, again, learning to be at peace with our current context.
Right.
And just like we have to get used to being in a world that's not Christian, predominantly Christian as much as it used to be, especially in places like where you and I live, we also have to get used to a world where translations don't hold the place of permanent fixture that they used to hold,
Right.
because the King James was that for so long. And I think for a
Mm.
long time there was the search for what will replace the King James. And here's the answer: nothing is, in my opinion, at least nothing soon. So
Yeah.
we're gonna live for a long time with having a lot of translations at our disposal. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the
Yeah.
reasons is the internet.
Yeah.
It's just easy, and we don't depend on print forms anymore. So if you're in your service and you're preaching a passage and you know this translation is the best in this particular passage, why not put it up on the screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easy to do that.
Yeah.
Why not do that? So I think we have to learn to be at peace with living in an environment where a lot of translations are at our disposal and are probably going to be used simultaneously a lot more than ever in the past. And that has a disadvantage because now we don't have shared language.
Yeah.
There is no correct way to say Psalm 23:1, but there's an advantage, which is you're no longer stuck on a particular wording
Right.
of a certain passage. So now you have the freedom, hopefully, not to pick the translation that you just happen to like it
Right.
or you think it says what you want, but the one that you think most clearly conveys to your audience
Yeah.
exactly what the original author was saying.
And that's a real tough one. And I think so let's take Psalm 23 as the example. For the longest time, I was used to the King James, New King James, ESV rendering, even though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. When the 2011 NIV came out, it was so jarring. It was so different, like through the
Mm,
darkest valleys. I think that's how
mm,
they render it.
mm,
Um, but that's the literal, I think, translation. But the meaning of it is the poetic meaning is what the King James was getting at. It's as if you were walking through the valley of the shadow of death. That's how dark it is. Now, if I were to complain, do I like the 2011 NIV or the King James or the New King James or the ESV? It's personal preference, but if it's poetry,
Yeah,
I would go with the ESV because
absolutely. Yep.
that's what you're trying to go for
Yep.
poetic language. Now it's much clearer in the NIV, and I get it. Okay, what he's saying is a dark valley, but it's more poetic to say it's like I feel like I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Like that's poetic, man. That's gold, right? Like I
Yeah.
would go with that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we should take advantage of the different translations that we have. And I
Yep.
think what I'm finding with the
Yep.
CSB is
Yep.
I prefer that. Nothing wrong with the NIV. I think I'm starting to prefer the CSB over the NIV in terms of that middle of the road
Mm.
translation,
Mm-hmm.
not formal, not quite
Mm-hmm.
informal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of it is, I think we talked a little bit about this. There's a real freshness to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like the mercy seat rendering in Romans. I feel like
Yeah.
that is amazing for them to
Yep.
be that strong to say, we're going to leave it in here. And they could
Yep.
have translated in a sort, the way everybody translated it. But you need
Yep.
that. You need that translation to make sense of the other ones and to use it
Mm.
in tandem with each other.
Right. So there's a good side to this. We actually have a lot of tools at our disposal as teachers now, and a lot of accessibility that we didn't have in years past. That even people in our congregation can have access to if we say, "Hey, go online and look at this translation. Read the passage in this translation." They can do that right away.
Yeah.
I also want to mention too, which we don't have enough time,
Mm.
unfortunately, to get even deeper into this. But maybe I'll have you back on the channel, or I could come back on yours, and we could talk more about the
I'd love
gender
that.
issue. The
Yeah.
gender language is one of those areas where, like it or not, English has changed.
Right.
That's something that in our lifetime has happened. Man used to be used a lot more to talk about humans in general. When I was young, you would still read that sometimes. Man does this.
Right.
Now, man doesn't. We're more likely to say humanity or
Right.
mankind, maybe. So the NIV and the CSB, frankly, because they're trying to speak to our language,
Hmm.
how do you say things today? They actually have to grapple even more with gender issues than really literal translations,
Right.
which don't care as much about how people say it today. As
Right.
long as people understand it, good enough,
Al-
right?
Although, although I would say that when we say guys, right, like, hey guys, come over here, like it's real informal. I don't think there's a lot of pushback towards that. Even my daughter.
Not
Go
not
ahead.
in not in general.
Right.
Not in general. I've
Right.
had, I think, even my daughters tease me though.
All right.
If I happen to say, "Hey guys," and there's no guy among them, they're like,
Yeah.
"We're not guys,"
Yeah. But I like this is where I'm landing with the whole gender issue in translations. I feel like if Paul is addressing men and women in the church, say brothers and sisters, but if it's clear, I think it was the James passage where he's addressing teachers and teachers are men. Yeah, definitely say brothers or
Mm,
use the masculine.
hmm.
But the difficulty with the English language is I wish we could all just say brothers and we all understand. But in the original language, that meant the word brothers, right? Adelphoi, it meant men and women. And I wish we could get back to that. And I think we talked a little bit about this, Tim, where I feel like the New King James and the NASB, the 95, they have the
Yeah.
best rendering for Adelphoi. I think brethren is great. Like it will capture both. It retains the masculinity of that word, but it's not limited to men. We understand it. The only thing about the word
Mm,
brethren is I can't take that to the pulpit. Like not in my context, right? Like I got to say brothers and sisters because everybody's going to well, every time I use the word brethren, I've got to explain it. It's not going to be the same way if I go to another part of the country. But
yeah.
I think that's where I'm landing. I prefer translations now, where I do feel like if you're going to say, if Paul is addressing men and women, make sure it's brothers and sisters. But if it's just going to be generalization, I think I'm okay with brothers. I'm okay with the masculine he because that's the world of the scriptures. Like that's the time and age. And I feel like we've got to retain some of that in the way that we render things in the scriptures. You know, it's a
We're in a
masculine
tough time.
word.
We're in a tough situation. We're in
Yeah.
transition times right now, and that's why I said we don't have as much time as I'd like because I'm reading about it, and it's neat because one of the books I'm reading said if you look in the American Heritage Dictionary, it says that he it can refer generically to anybody.
Yeah.
And that was written in 2005 is when that book was written. You look up
Oh.
the American Heritage Dictionary today and it says something different. It says
Oh.
it used to refer to people generically.
Yeah, and I know we don't have time for this, but I'm not comfortable with using them or they to encompass
Yeah.
both, because then
Yeah.
you're messing with, you're messing with the language. You're messing with the original language.
Yeah.
But
I
I don't
know.
know.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. But the point is English is changing
it is changing.
right
Yeah.
before our eyes, and that's a tough thing for us to live with. Um, but So I just want to say before we say goodbye that everybody, Pastor Joe is doing a read through of the Christian Standard Bible. You can go to his channel, Joe's Bibles, and he's encouraging people to go through with him starting September 1st.
September 1st, come and join me. I've never read through this translation. I'd love for as many people to come and join me. It's going to be 4 months, September through December. It's going to be about, if you read through and used my Bible reading plan that somebody else helped me put together, it's about a 35 minutes a day read, and I think that's accomplishable.
That is awesome. I hope people will join you for that. I've read through the Christian Standard Bible within a time frame like that, and I found it incredibly edifying.
Hmm.
It's a great translation, so if you want to check out this translation, this gives you a really good opportunity
Yes.
to check it out. But also, all of us need to be reading the Bible, so this is an encouragement to be part of a community that will help you read through the Bible. Thank you so much, Pastor Joe, for
Hey.
joining me today.
Thank you, and congratulations. What an honor to be here.